Imagine facing one of the hardest battles a parent can go through, watching your child fight cancer. Today's guest, Mindy Dykes, knows that journey all too well. Nearly 2 decades ago, she experienced it firsthand with her son's diagnosis. Now, Mindy dedicates her life to making a difference for other families on a similar path. As director of family programs for the Children's Cancer Research Fund and co-director of Camp Norden, she brings hope and support to those affected by childhood cancer during both treatment and beyond. From her home in Wisconsin, Mindy juggles it all, advocating for childhood cancer research, raising 2 teenagers, and loving her 2 Great Danes. Her story, strength, and passion are truly inspiring and impactful, and I am thrilled to have her here with us today. You're listening to Act to Impact with Brandi DeVries. Through heartfelt stories of resilience, hope, and community, I share my personal experience as a longtime advocate and fundraiser for the national nonprofit Children's Cancer Research Fund. Invite pediatric cancer families to tell their stories and highlight individuals who use their unique gifts to create a positive impact. It's time to ignite action. Welcome to Act to Impact. I'm Brandi DeVries, and today I'm chatting with a very special guest, Mindy. I can't wait for you to meet her and get ready for her passion because Mindy brings it. But first, if you are new to the show, and you probably are because this is a new show, thanks for being here. And you probably are here because you're an action taker, and that's what we do here. So before we dive into this episode, let's pause. Please show me how you take action. Click the follow button, like this episode, or leave a comment. That will help us reach more action takers like yourself. But let's dive into this episode. I'm excited to be here with Mindy. So Mindy, again, welcome to Act to Impact. I just want to lay the groundwork kind of about how we know each other and why you were invited on to Act to Impact. But Mindy and some of the team at Children's Cancer Research Fund were some of the very first people that I told about the show Act to Impact. And I knew this team and Mindy would have some insight into what I was hoping to accomplish with this show, given my long relationship as a supporter of Children's Research Fund. And I wanted their buy-in as well. If I'm going to be talking about pediatric cancer and visiting with pediatric cancer families, I wanted to make sure that they were involved. But Mindy right away was someone that I knew I wanted to be part of this show. But we were first introduced several years back when I was part of the SOAR Leadership Council of Children's Cancer Research Fund. So our group at that time was shifting gears from raising money and funds for the Emerging Scientist grants into supporting funds that would be allocated to Camp Norden, which we're going to talk about that a lot, I think, later. And Mindy will fill us in on that. But I remember that day like it was yesterday. I was sitting actually like very much in the same spot as I am right now. And we were on a Zoom call, and Mindy came on and she joined our meeting and was talking about, I believe it was the first year of Camp Norden. I think that you were giving like the recap of it and talking to us about the campers and what you guys did and the impact that it was making on the pediatric cancer families, and also talking about a very cool virtual component of camp, which just lets kids who maybe can't physically go to camp experience a camp-like community and environment. And I know that's really evolved over the years too. So it's cool. We'll hear about that as well. But what stuck out to me about you, Mindy, and it does to this day, is just the passion and the energy that came through in your voice that day. And you were upbeat and energetic about a very hard to talk about issue, childhood cancer, only to find out later in that conversation too that your son is a cancer survivor. So I think, Mindy, that's where we need to start today is if you could tell us about Connor, your son. But I can't believe he's a senior.
Oh, right. Thank you again so much, Brandi, for having me on. I'm really excited to talk to you today and to get into the things that I am so incredibly passionate about. So our son's cancer journey began when he was 6 weeks old. Lots of times people think that's a typo or a misstep. 6 weeks seems impossible, but that was the scenario. Connor had become really agitated and ill. So as an infant, it's hard to communicate, right? I mean, he can't tell us what's going on, but he was inconsolable and crying. It seemed like he was in a lot of pain. We turned lights on. He would scream, cry, projectile vomiting. He'd had a lot of trouble eating and feeding, and we'd been giving him medicine for what we thought was maybe like some acid reflux going on. And as the day went on, as the evening went on, we just knew there's something wrong. Like, this is just not normal. We need to get him to the hospital. And in the 15 minutes it took for us to gather and make sure we had everything we needed in the diaper bag, his left eye had swollen shut and a mass of fluid appeared on his forehead. And then we knew it was emergent. So we got to our local hospital. And while they're kind of doing the workup and asking all the questions, I saw at the nurse's station that the main doctor was on the phone. And I didn't even know until I was like, what's he doing up there? That they were calling for an ambulance transfer for us to get over to Children's Hospital. So Connor remained stable on our ambulance ride over. But when we got to Children's, there was a team of 12 people waiting to meet us. They looked terrified. And that's when I started to get scared. Like, this is moving really fast. This is serious. And I don't understand what's all going on. And so they got him in for an emergency CT scan and came out and started trying to intubate him and said, can you come over, to this room over here? And I said, I don't want to go to that room because, it's not going to be what you want to hear. Yeah. 18 years later, and I'm still right back in that moment. So they had paged a pediatric neurosurgeon. So they discovered in the CT a mass that had taken up almost Connor's entire left hemisphere. It was the size of my husband's fist. And the hope was to debulk the tumor enough to get the pressure of the mass off of his brainstem. So Connor's vital organs were beginning to shut down from the pressure on his brainstem. They really didn't think he'd survive surgery because there wasn't time to do any other imaging, right? So there wasn't any time to do any diagnostic, like dye, MRIs, anything. But they knew if they didn't try something, he would definitely die in the emergency room. So I whispered in his ear before they took him away to fight. And then we waited. And we had an agreement with the staff that anytime they came out to do an update, which they did regularly throughout the day, Connor's surgery was well over 6 hours, that I needed to know if he was here or not before I would be able to hear anything else they were saying. So they would come in, we'd be like, okay, thumbs up, he's here, he's stable, and give us updates. They were miraculously able to remove the entire tumor without losing him, without having unexpected huge brain bleeds, all of these things. So when we've got, and during that time too, I remember who ended up being now our main oncologist for Connor's treatment coming out, and he had the samples. He's like, I've got the samples we're going to send out to pathology, met with us briefly. And Connor went into a pediatric intensive care unit for recovery from his surgery. The moment we went in to see him and all of the tubes and the beeps and the machines, and, you could hardly see him. There was just so much equipment around him. He was so tiny in that big bed. And I just audibly gasped and I said, "Oh, Bubba." And he opened his eyes. And that is still one of my favorite moments of my entire lifetime, for sure. So 5 days later, we were given the diagnosis. Connor was diagnosed with congenital glioblastoma multiforme stage 4. And we're given the information about how deadly this kind of brain cancer is. and what needed to be done for his best chance of survival. The typical treatments that had been used for this very rare cancer usually gave the child about 2 to 3 years of life, and then the cancer would come back. It would metastasize, riddle their body, and ultimately take their lives. So they wanted to be more aggressive in treatment to give him the best chance of a longer life. So Connor had an autologous bone marrow transplant at the University of Minnesota, in addition to the standard chemo. And he was the youngest at the time ever harvested for his bone marrow. So the periphesis machine that they used to harvest the bone marrow took more blood volume to prime than his body carried. So they would literally have to stop it every 2 minutes and check calcium levels and all these things, because they were trying to do it in slow motion, because if they turned it over too fast, right, it would just be catastrophic as well. So he successfully made it through that procedure so he could have the cells altered for cancer-fighting cells and given back to him a few months later. So Connor experienced all of that before he was 7 months old. And the best part, as you've mentioned, is that he is now a senior in high school. We are planning graduation. He will be 18 in just a few weeks. Like, it is just unbelievable. And I love every opportunity to say the reason Connor is here today is because of the research that was done before we were the family in the ICU, the weeks, years, months, way before. So they had options. They knew enough about, the treatment and the success of it to give him the best chance at life.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. If at that time, nearly 18 years ago, was his case, very rare? Was it one of the first? Or like you said, they did have some research so that they could help him.
Yeah. And it was still, truly a handful of cases that they could look at over the last, 10 or 15 years. I remember when we got all the information about his diagnosis, our oncologist had gotten off a conference call that morning with a specialist from California, one from Germany, one from another center, I believe it was in Eastern United States, and one from Sweden. And when he was like, you are more than welcome and encouraged to get a second opinion, to find out more information. And we were like, who else would we call? Right. Like, you literally have the top, and it's literally only those people in the world you were just on the phone with, giving them, all the details about Connor's case. So as terrifying as it was to understand how rare it was and how little they knew, it was very comforting to know that they knew enough to have a plan. Mm-hmm. Because if we wouldn't have had a plan, he wouldn't be here. It would have been a very, very different outcome.
Yeah. Do you know if the tissue, the samples that were collected that day that were sent to pathology, do you know was that part of Connor? Has that been used for further research?
Yeah, it is. And they were sent off to, I can't remember, I think it was 4 or 5 different institutions to get, those same doctors to get that pathology back, to make sure that they were all in agreement of what the actual cancer was. The multiform in glioblastoma means it's a bunch of different types of brain cancer cells that are all working together, which makes it so much incredibly harder to treat because of the behavior of the cancer cells. And so it was a lot more complicated than we could have realized then. Over the years now, I know a lot more, but I don't know anything in the world of cancer, but I do. And every time I've learned, something new, and I understand the disease itself a little bit more, and the researchers, it's even more just shocking to me that Connor's here. I do know up until today, because the information could change tomorrow, that Connor is the longest living survivor of congenital glioblastoma.
I just got goosebumps. I didn't realize. Wow, you are probably still in his ear, like self-consciously, fighter, fight. I mean, really, I feel like something like that, no matter how old you are, especially from a mother, it probably is just ingrained in him.
Yeah, and we are so incredibly close, right? There's a bond for sure. He has looked to us as parents for, I don't want to say the motivation, but just that comfort of, we've got you and we're going to figure today out. Connor has a ton of late effects from his treatment. His survivorship came at a huge cost, and it has made for some really rough days, hard battles with mental health. A few years back, we saw his spirit start to be affected. I think out of all the years, that was the hardest, first grade of high school, ninth grade, which I think is awful for everyone on some level.
Anyway.
Right? It's just not the best. And it's growing up, and it's part of the deal. But it was really hard for him because that was the first time that he was really aware in concrete ways of how different he was from his peers, impacting things, understanding that he wouldn't be going to driver's ed. He's got refractable epilepsy. So, he knew enough about some of his late effects to know that that would be a challenge, and he wouldn't be following the typical timeline. We will never say never, because I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. I never want to be the cap. I don't want to be the ceiling for what Connor can accomplish in his lifetime. And I had to figure that out too. I remember years ago, I think Connor was like 3 or 4, and we had done some ambassador work for CCRF for one of our galas. And I watched this video back a few years back, and I had said at the time, my dream for Connor Dykes is to get on the school bus with all of his peers, and no one could ever tell that he'd ever been through any of this. Just to blend right in, just to be able to be equal with his peers. And I've now realized that that's an absolutely ridiculous dream for him, because Connor was not meant to blend in with his peers. Connor was meant to stand up. Connor was meant to inspire. Connor was meant to shine. And he loves doing it. He will tell you, Google my name, I'm kind of a big deal.
I love that. You should own that.
Right? He's just phenomenal. But again, a lot of it, there's been so many learning curves for us, and just the lens that it has given us in how we live our life, and how it, rolls into the work that I do with CCRF. Like, it's just, it's so cool and connected, but I'm so grateful that I've had, I'm grateful that I've had the opportunity to see it through that different lens, life, and what's possible too. And I think that's why I'm such a big dreamer in my profession too, because I do believe that a lot of things are possible, and usually much more than one might think is possible.
Yeah. Well, on that note, it sounds like we know that Connor has had some difficult times through his journey, but was there ever a time through his journey that you really wondered if he would get to see this day, that now he's a senior and 18 years old?
Absolutely.
And what did you do to not only get yourself through that, but your whole family? Because there's Connor, there's her husband, you have family members as well.
Yeah. I remember going to a luncheon. We were getting some research updates, and it was specifically about the autologous transplant and the fighter cells that they had created and manipulated. And I learned that morning that they expected it to have an 8-year shelf life, that it would actively work within the body constantly. It kind of worked as like a tool to fight off cancer cells on like the microscopic level. And I just remember like the wind just kind of being taken out of me, and I set my coffee cup down. I was like, what did he just say? Like, and at the time, Connor was 6. And so I was sitting there going, are you telling me he might only have 2 years? Wow. How are we going to navigate that? Live for today, but not plan for tomorrow at all, because that's not helpful. To your point, we have life, we have jobs, Connor has a big sister. Like we have these things that are ever changing. And it has really, I mean, I've planned Connor's funeral. I've prepared myself for a horrible outcome.
Does he know that now that he's 18, does he know that?
We've talked about it, definitely. His biggest fear, more than dying, was how he was going to take care of himself when we died or when he was older. He recently had a huge brain surgery just a few months back, and Connor is old enough to make informed decisions. So what we try to do for him is to find out as much information as we can that we think will help him with the decision. Lay out all the information in a way that he can understand it best. Connor has cognitive delays, and there's a lot of things that are challenging for him, short-term memory, things like that make it really hard to learn. But he can, if he's given it in the right way and with the right space to do so. And so with this option of this surgery to help with the seizures, we're like, it's your call. We don't have any expectation from you. If you want to do it, if you don't want to do it, if you want to leave everything the way it is, that's fine. The downside of not doing it would mean that Connor ultimately would have a seizure that they wouldn't be able to stop, and it would take his life. He'd failed 13 different medications. I mean, we've, been testing and trying to treat this for, almost 18 years. Or here's the risks. There's some, Connor had a stroke when he was 6 weeks old. The day all of his symptoms came out that we were able to interpret that something was wrong. He was having a stroke. And so he's had right-sided weakness. He's got some of that stroke tissue damage in his head. And so we're giving him, as much as we can explain to him. And without hesitation at all, he said, I'd rather die trying. And I said, okay, that's what we needed to know. We know now where you're at, what you're willing. We know how horrible you're experiencing for your quality of life is right now, because seizures would interrupt everything. I mean, he hadn't had a sleepover at a peer's house, mostly because seizures every few hours, sometimes many in a row. And there's a lot of families and parents that wouldn't feel comfortable, taking on a medically fragile child. And I don't, I'm like, I find myself, I get nervous, like, oh, what are we going to do today? How can I help you? So he was very aware of it. And it was just so kind of black and white to him. He'd even made a comment. He's like, well, I mean, if I die, I'm going to go be with grandma. So like, it's just, very things that we tend to make complex. And I don't say we as humans, that could be an option, but I know just for our family, he makes it very simple for us. Mm-hmm. A lot of the decisions aren't as complex as you might think. So yeah.
So you've learned a lot from Connor then through this process, it sounds like, too.
Yeah. Yeah. So much. He's just amazing. So wise.
Yeah. So what are some other moments that you've seen Connor's resilience shine through? And do you remember if there was another moment that really sparked a turning point through his journey that you were like, yeah, he's going to be okay. He's going to be able to make some of these decisions as you're explaining and that type of thing.
There was one day he was struggling with, I feel like it was a button on his shirt. Like he was going to wear a button down shirt. And typically Connor will wear clothes that are easier to dress, whether it's, because it's a zipper or it's just a pullover, because some of that motor skills is difficult for him. And I was standing next to him when we were talking, and I said, do you want me to help you with that? And he stopped and he said, well, how would I ever learn to do it for myself if you do it for me?
Yeah.
You're 100% right.
Yeah.
I'll just sit here, keep my hands to myself and keep talking.
You walk away. Okay, Mr. Independent, I can tell you have this. But that feels good though as a mom too, right?
I mean,
yes.
And then the big aha to me was he's starting to dream forward for the first time. He is thinking about his future. And that was huge. It wasn't just about a button and a shirt, right? It was so much more than that. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's doing it. Like, he's starting to think about what's possible. And learning, he just did a vision board at school, and he's texting me. He's like, what would I put on it? And I'm like, what do you want? Like, what do you want for yourself? Do you picture paychecks? Do you picture, the sweet gaming setup? He loves gaming. What is it? And it was a challenge for him. He was stressed about it for the month that they worked on it. Because
I feel like that's stressful for anybody.
He's not comfortable. Like,
let alone a teenager.
Do I put it on there? What do I want? Like, is a Lamborghini ridiculous? Maybe, but put it on there. Like, there's no right or wrong to it. Yeah. Which is tricky because he likes his boundaries in the guardrails, the bumpers. They're easy for him to navigate. He likes guidelines. He likes rules. And he's just become, slowly more responsible. Connor has some pretty significant vision loss in each eye from the brain damage that he incurred. And so there's things, we had some vision field testing done before surgery to make sure that they weren't going to take a lot more and, create a bigger deficit. But for us, it was the first time that we've had that kind of testing done, especially at the time he was, 17. We were blown away by how much vision he had lost. It was a lot more than we thought it was from when he was an infant. And every time we learn something, we're just more amazed. And I think there might have even been an advantage for him that we didn't focus on his disabilities or the challenges. We focused on how can we get through this? How can we make this work for you? So even if sometimes it was born out of a little bit of naiveness or not realizing the full situation of what he was experiencing, I think it helped. It just helped him, to just think positively and to see what's possible.
Great. So your work with Children's Cancer Research Fund, do you think that you'd still be working for this national nonprofit if you hadn't been affected by childhood cancer?
No, not even remotely. My background was in art management, was a gallery director. And I still love being creative, and I bring that, to the program side. But no, childhood cancer wasn't even my radar, let alone an amazing nonprofit whose, headquarters were right in our backyard. And I learned about CCRF through our treatment at the hospital, and was happy to find out that there was an org that was dedicated so closely to us, about the research. We were so just aware, as I mentioned before, about how impactful this specific research was for Connor's treatment. And it is one of our focus areas at CCRF. So, which I didn't know that at the time. But the first opportunity came up as a community outreach coordinator, and working with families and getting to know their stories and bringing them into the folds and making sure that they knew about CCRF and what was possible, and helping them share their stories. We know that there's a huge impact when people can feel as much as possible that emotional connection. These are real families. These are real children. This is real suffering. And we can do something about it. And I mean, even years in, I had a lot of friends and peers say, how do you do that every day? Like, how do you meet these families who are losing their children, who are experiencing relapses, who are just going through what will ultimately be the worst times of their lives? I've met them in the middle of the worst crisis that they've ever experienced. And the truth of it is, they're more like me than a lot of my, coffee date friends. And we're similar, and we've experienced, similar things. And there isn't an elephant in the room. We just, can just get right to it. And there's a life giving to that, to connect with other people that have experienced a similar path. And I believe that in all realms of everything, that it's really empowering to just not even feel alone in something that is so rare.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Let's talk about too, like you mentioned, your background was initially in art and using your creativity. And I can see how you've probably been able to use your creativity with Camp Norden, but tell us more about camp. And then also, in what ways have you witnessed cancer fighters and survivors thrive because of their camp experience?
Oh, it's so good. It's so
I know
good.
it is. That's why I can't wait to get to this part.
It's just, and so when working with families, we're working on the research side. It's got a longer tail. It's going to take a little bit more time, right? So how can we help them now? How can we help? And I was so informed by our own experience with Connor, like literally living in the day, in the moment. I'm like, this is what he's experiencing. Pretty sure he's probably not the only one, and you start asking families about what their child's experiencing or siblings. And so I had started thinking of ways, like, how can we help right now in a way that's meaningful, that will actually create a feeling of change within themselves. And I am not saying that it is not great to get meals brought to your door, because it is. And it is wonderful to get the much needed gas, gift cards, like these things, these tangible things are very, very needed. But what I was really called to make an impact in was that emotional and spiritual experience they're being. Isolation is horrible through treatment. Isolation as a teenager is way worse. Because they just want to, like we were talking about ninth grade, right? They just, as awful as ninth grade can be, that's where they want to be, right? I want to experience.
They don't want to miss out on anything.
No, I don't want to be at the hospital for weeks on end. I don't want to deal with the side effect from the treatment that gave me another side effect. And it's hard. Their treatments are, they're incredibly painful. These kids pull off a level of what we view as, man, they're resilient and they don't have a choice. They weren't asked. They just want to live, right? So thinking of ways like what could really make an impact. And some friends of CCRF came to me and said, we're missing a community from this camp that we've been working with up in northern Minnesota. And we'd like to talk to you about it and represent the, childhood cancer community. So we went through all the back and forth and figured out the how. It wasn't a decision of should or shouldn't we. I knew instantly, like, oh, this has to happen. This is happening. I just need to get a hold of the right people. Like who's ready to say yes to this? Fortunately, a lot of people were. It became, I don't want to say fast tracked because COVID slowed us down a little bit, but many, many supporters, donors, families were ready. Like, let's go. How soon can we do this? And so Camp Norden was born. And we've put a lot of care and detail into the planning of the camp. What makes Camp Norden unique is, sure, it has a lot of the typical camp activities that a kid would want to experience at camp. So the repeat after me songs, the campfires, the rotations, amazing counselors, amazing property that the in-person one happens on. But there's medical staff there. There's nurses there. There's oncologists. Our medical director is the head of pediatric oncology. It's phenomenal. And the ratio of staff to campers is fantastic. There's so many stories, Brandi. I'm just thinking about some that
I know, I'm sure it's hard for you to pick one.
From the parents' angle to the, I will share that day one of drop off of the first day of camp. I was bawling. I mean, probably 4 times before the third card even pulled out. I'm like, this isn't sustainable. I'm not going to make it through this day. But parents literally hugging our director and crying, thanking them for this opportunity for their kid to just get to go be a kid. the 3 8-year-olds that found themselves on the beach for their water test, and one noticed their port scar, and the other one noticed that they all had it, and they started dancing and locking arms and skipping in a circle, singing. Like, we're like, there's the whole goal of the week. Like, we just, like, that's it. Just to connect with other kids like them.
Yeah.
And there was a parent recently this year at camp that said, thank you so much. I'm like, oh, it's an honor. Thank you for entrusting us with your kids. And she said, no, like, look at me. She said, this is the only week out of the year that I get respite. Thank you. I was like, yeah, you get a break too. And you're craving that, right? For your life balance. There was another family that took the camper's sibling on a up north week vacation while the camper was camping, so they could give that child one-on-one parent time. Like, there's so many tentacles, right, of areas that it touches just outside of that camper in their experience. I see it with staff. So the nursing staff often are oncologists that have worked on the same floor. And the last time they saw this camper, he was fighting for his life on a ventilator. And that day she got to watch him play catch in the field. But, and they're like, this is so life-giving for us too, because this is what we're working hard with them for too. It's not just camp, right? It just isn't. It is so much more than that.
What are some ways that people can help support Camp Norden? Is there volunteer opportunities? Is there ways that there's needs that camp has that people can support? How could they get involved?
Yeah. So there are. And, we try to be really creative every year on ways that more people can get involved, because there's just only so much you can do, like physical during camp on site, which is, it's the best place to be. I'm not going to say it isn't. It's phenomenal. But there's a lot of things around being a champion for camp and for our programs, because having the awareness, talking about the program, sharing it with other people, thinking about who is in my network that could actually bring something that's next level. Like I mentioned before, I dream big. There is no reason that a very, very famous musician can't come for talent show night. There is no reason that they can't surprise those kids. And there's different programming opportunities. So if somebody has something that they think would be really beneficial to do, whether it's a certain kind of craft session or if it's something totally different, we want to know about it. We want to look at it. We will never just assume that we've got it. We got the programming figured out. And plus they get bored. They need new changes. The other thing I love about this camp is there's no guidelines for how long you've been in or out of treatment. You can currently be in treatment, depending, that's why we have our medical director that reviews it. There's no limitations on where you live, what state you're in, and camp is free of charge to families. So the funding's important. We need them to be able to be 100% supported. So there's no barriers to get them to camp. Same with the virtual camp experience. No barriers. You've mentioned that previously. That's something that is not just as one of our virtual campers said, I thought it was going to be like this boring Zoom call. This is amazing. There are magicians. There's VR escape rooms. There are people from literally all over the country. There was a year that they went on a VR tour to an alpaca farm, but they had also gotten the alpaca hats mailed to them. Like, it's so incredibly creative, and kids are tuning in from hospital rooms. We've had campers that are on hospice that still get to go to camp. Like, that changes their life experience and their families in the most profound way. So there can be a variety of ways to get involved. I'm trying to stay focused on your question. And it's not always just financial. That's a big help. It's huge to keep the programming coming, but it's just tapping into to your networks and thinking creatively yourself and not making any assumptions that they probably wouldn't like it. No, bring it to me. Let me hear about it. Let me see if there's a way,
Yes. Well, I hope that there will be somebody listening that is as big of dreamer as you are and has some connections, and there's some collaboration that comes out of it, that somebody is going to listen to this and say, I have this idea. I'm going to reach out to Mindy. So hopefully maybe you'll be able to report back on that if anybody ever reaches out to you.
I for
so
sure will let you know. I'm excited.
Yes. Yeah. Well, okay. We're going to start wrapping up here. And to close, in your opinion, what is the best way for people to support pediatric cancer families?
I think recognizing that these children cannot do this on their own. These families are burdened with trying to literally help their child live. We have the ability, whether we're through the journey, whether we've never been impacted by it, to make a difference. And that is why it's so incredibly important. These families, they're exhausted. These kids, they can't do it. And the reality is this is their disease. This is what's affecting their peers. So just the awareness of it, the education about it. And it's more than, as you know, September is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, and we go gold, and that's fantastic. And it may seem like armchair activation to just reshare things, but it makes an impact. Again, you're reaching different people, and educating yourself about the research and what's happening. We really pride ourselves at CCRF on what we select to fund and the rigorous process that it has to go through for what's getting funded and what it means in the bigger landscape. Ask questions about that. I think the education around it is so huge. And I also hate this part, but the occurrence of childhood cancer is increasing. It is not decreasing. So it is going to continue to become more and more of a prominent issue. It is the number one disease killer of children. It impacts entire communities, not just families. And I think those are all the reasons why I'm so incredibly passionate outside of our own journey with childhood cancer.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for being here today, Mindy. And if people want to learn more information about Children's Cancer Research Fund, Camp Norden, the patient and family programs, where can they go?
They should go to childrenscancer.org and navigate through the stories, the research updates, the program arms that we have. And there's contact information on there too. That's the best way of getting a hold of me too, to fill out the contact me email, and it will get to me. Keep checking in regularly, sign up, get the newsletters. Yes. And we'd love to meet you.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Act to Impact with Brandi DeVries. If this show ignited your fire and inspired you to take action to make an impact, please share this episode with a friend, leave a 5-star review, or write a review to let others know how the show impacted you. I can't wait to see the action you are taking to make an impact, and I'd love for you to share that with our community. Go ahead and tag me on social media as you are out making an impact in the world. Do you have a story to share and want to be a guest on Act to Impact? I'd love to connect with you.